Good evening, everyone. We have now come to the final session, final lecture of this conference, which will be delivered by Professor Joseph Oesterle. He is from University of Paris 6. His main research interest, though, lies in number theory. It is fair to say that he is a universal mathematician and is one of the finest expositor of various branches of mathematics. Today, he is going to talk about some simple open problems in mathematics. Professor Oesterle.
Is it okay? Yes, it seems. Okay, let me start by telling you what I shall not talk about. I shall not talk about the main big conjectures in mathematics like Riemann hypothesis, Birch and Swinnerton-Dyer conjecture, or more technical conjectures like Hodge conjecture, Bellison conjecture, Bloch-Kato conjecture, which are highly technical. I shall also not talk of rather media covered conjectures that you find more or less each time one speaks of elementary conjectures in mathematics, like ABC conjecture or the twin primes conjecture or the Goldbach conjecture. The problems which I want to present to you today are simple problems and simple open problems. What do I mean by simple? They are very simple to formulate and a priori accessible to any high school student, sometimes even to primary school students. Second, a priori, when one looks at them, they seem at first sight to be simple to solve. But these problems have been stated already a long time ago, many decades, sometimes centuries, and have been attacked by first-rank mathematicians, even Fields medalists from time to time, and have not been solved today. So in fact, they are simple a priori to state, a priori look simple to solve, but are not simple to solve at all. So I shall just make a small commitment here. If by luck problems, either by positive or negative, I would be very happy to grant him a PhD and to invite him as a postdoc in my university in Paris. So I have selected a certain number of problems. We will just see how much time I have. And let us see whether in this theory we can formulate a very down-to-earth and easy problem. We take F, a family of sets. Let us assume that this family is finite. Finite family of finite sets. And we assume two things. This family should not be trivial, so at least one set is non-empty. And second assumption that we make is the family is what is called union closed. So if you have two sets in the family, their union also is in the family. And here now I state, so you see the data is rather easy to understand. There is no technicality here. And now I start with the question, is there an element that belongs to at least half of the sets of the family? So this statement, which is a very, very simple statement, is a conjecture which is due to Peter Frankl. And dates from 1979. And to tell you what is known about this conjecture, there is one case where the conjecture is obvious. Obvious is if there is one of the set in the family consists just of one single element. Why is it obvious in this case? Because if you take any element in your family that does not contain this particular set, then the union of this set together with this one element is again a set of the family, and therefore at least half of the members of the family contain this particular element X. So in this case, it's very easy to say. And what are I shall not trace you the whole history of the problem and all the contributors, but what is in fact the present best known results in this direction? It is known if there are at most 46 sets in my family F. And this is a work that is due to Roberts and Simpson and dates only for 2 years, 2010. It is also known if the largest set in my family F has at most 11 elements. So you see how poor we are mathematicians when we try to deal with set theory. We are not able to deal with sets with more than 11 elements to solve such more or less trivial question. So this is the first example of a simple problem which is open in mathematics. Now I shall take a second domain in mathematics. The second domain will be arithmetic. Of course, there are plenty of open problems in arithmetic, but I have chosen one which looks to me very nice. The problem is the following. Does there exist for any integer n at least 2 integers a, b, c, all of them at least 1, such that 4 over n is equal to 1 over a plus 1 over b plus 1 over c. So if you take any n, can you always write 4 over n as the sum of the inverses of 3 natural numbers? This conjecture is slightly older than the previous one. It's a conjecture due to Strauss and Erdős. And it has been stated in 1948. It is sometimes called also the Egyptian conjecture for the following reason. Egyptians used to write fractions with small numerators and denominators as a sum of inverses of natural numbers. They used, of course, not only 3, generally they took more, but they used to try to write down each small fraction in this way. So in fact, what is known about this conjecture, if you give me any integer n, let us do it. Perhaps Baloo will give me a number between 50 and 100. 73. This is marvelous because it's one of the most difficult one. Recognizes that Baloo knows the problem because he gives me the most complicated one. Yes. So just let me write down. So 4 over 73. So I start with a reasonable approximation of 4 over 73. I shall take as a reasonable approximation just 1 over 20, which is not an exact value. So what is the difference between the two? It is 7 over 20 times 73. And then I notice that if I take 73 plus 4, I get 7 times 11. So if I have this fraction, what I have to do is to multiply by 11 above and below, and replace my 7 times 11 by 73 plus 4. And of course, 73 over all these things is 1 over an integer, and 4 over all these things is 1 over an integer, and I am done. So in fact, you see each time you take a given number, generally you have a priori no difficulty in finding these three numbers A, B, C. And people have started to see whether for some particular numbers n, the problem is easy to solve, and they have found out that the thing is easy if n is not congruent to 1 mod 24. As you can recognize, Baloo gave me a number which is congruent to 1 mod 24. So it is easy in this case. I just give you, for example, one reason, because there are some congruences that are valid. For example, if I take a number n, which is congruent to 2 mod 3. So if I take a number which is of the form 3m plus 2. In fact, I can give you an explicit formula for the decomposition of such a number. You will just check that it is 1 over m plus 1 over 3m plus 2 plus 1 over m plus 1 times 3m plus 2. So for these numbers, I have an explicit formula for infinitely many such numbers. And in fact, for each congruence class, other than the congruent class 1 mod 24, in fact, you have such an explicit formula. And if you go a little bit beyond 24, if you, for example, go to congruence classes modulo 840, there are only 6 congruence classes that cause you some problem. But there are always some remaining congruence classes that pose a little bit problem, and for which you have to invent a new method. So what is known about this conjecture? The only thing which is known besides this kind of results, which I have said, is that the conjecture has been verified, of course, by computer checking for n less than or equal to 2 times 10 to the 14. This is the last verification that has been done. It has been done this year, in 2012. And this problem, for example, has been attacked last year by Terence Tao together with Elsholtz. Terence Tao is a fields medalist. And when you face a problem that looks too difficult to be done, what do? Instead of trying to solve the problem, you try to say that statistically it is solved. So in fact, what Terence Tao showed, that if you give yourself an n, randomly chosen in some large band, in fact, the average number of solutions ABC to your problem is of the order of log n to the cube. So in fact, there exists solution, but it does not mean that for any particular n there exists one. And for the moment, this conjecture is, this is the present status of this open problem. Now, let me take a third domain of mathematics, which belongs to yes, high school or perhaps even primary school studies. The third domain of mathematics will be triangles. Can I give you a conjecture about triangles? In fact, take a triangle and imagine that your triangle is a billiard, and there is a ball going in the billiard and bouncing by reflection on the boundaries of the billiard. Does there exist a closed is the same thing as periodical orbit for the trajectory of a ball? A closed orbit, a closed trajectory, let us say, a ball in this triangular billiard. So, of course, reflections are done exactly this way. When you go to the boundary, you have the reflection according to the usual reflections law, and you do not allow a trajectory to go into an angle, because if you go to an angle, you do not know how to bounce back. So in fact, what I call a closed trajectory would be a trajectory where you bounce on the boundary, and at some moment, you are again on the same path as the original path. So, in fact, this problem is still older than the two others which I have stated, because this problem is more than 2 centuries old, for example. And there is one case where the problem is easily solved. I think that the solution was probably known already to geometers in the antiquity, in fact. And I shall tell you when the problem is easily solved. So the answer is easy if all the angles if the 3 angles of your triangles are less than 40 degrees. And I show you why it is easy, and I shall do the proof for you. So you take your triangle and you draw the heights of the triangle, the 3 heights. And then you do a little bit of geometry. I don't know whether I have color chalk. Yes, I have color chalk. That is perfect. So you do a little bit geometry and you say this angle, the blue angle which I have here, is a complement of the green angle which I have here because I have a right triangle. But this angle here, the blue one here, is also the complement of the green one because I have here a right triangle. So in fact, these 2 blue angles are the same. But I have more angles which have the same size as the blue one. Here, I have a quadrilateral. How do you say? Quadrilateral? Yes. And it has 2 right angles. Therefore, you can put it inside of a circle, and therefore, if you look at any angle that intercepts the same arc, it will also be a blue angle. So in fact, for this reason, this angle here is also a blue angle, same size as this one. And if I am using now this quadrilateral and this one, which I have here, also 2 right angles, for the same reason, this angle, which intercepts this arc exactly the same as the blue angle here, is again a blue angle. And then I find out a very nice property. When you take the endpoints of your heights, in fact, and you join them, you get a triangle, and this triangle is the trajectory of a billiard ball, because here you have the 2 same angles, therefore the ball bounces back and in fact describes a trajectory which is periodical of period 3. So in fact in this case it is very easy to get the result. And what is not known in general about this problem? In fact, the best known up to date is in fact a very long and technical papers, 80 pages long paper with computer-aided proofs with a large number of computation that proves the following. In fact, it is true also if the largest angle is less than or equal to 100 degrees. And so this paper is a paper which was written up by Richard Evan Schwanz, published in 2006, but of course very technical, very long, and uses many computer verifications between 90 and 100 degrees, and nothing is known above 100 degrees except for very special angles, for example, angles which are rational multiples of a flat angle. For these, we have also some results. But you see here, you have an open problem which concerns very elementary notions in mathematics, the notion of a triangle. Yes? In what? No, above 100, about 90, there is never anymore any periodic orbit of period 3. The real conjecture one has is that not only there exists one closed trajectory, but there exist infinitely many trajectories. Why is one interested in a triangular billiard? Because if you take a billiard which has a convex form, but the form is smooth, let us say C1, boundary C1, then, in fact, the same problem becomes very easy to... I take now, for example, a billiard which has a random form, a convex form, but I assume that the boundary is smooth. In fact, in such a billiard, you can prove very easily that for each given n, there exists a periodic orbit of period n. Let me just show you how, for example, you find a periodic orbit of period 2 to show you that it is very easy. To get a periodic orbit of period 2, you just choose 2 points, A and B, such that the distance of A to B is as large as possible. The 2 points, of course, on the boundary of your billiard. And then, because your distance is maximum, what happens is, in fact, the segment AB is perpendicular to the tangent at A and is perpendicular to the tangent at B. Therefore, this is a periodic orbit of period 2. It bounces back. And a slightly more involved argument will show you that, in fact, there exists a periodic orbit for any n given. In fact, this does not work in the triangle because there are n points, and we have said from the beginning that we do not allow the trajectory to go through the endpoints, and this makes the thing difficult. And of course, one has a much more general conjecture about billiards. The conjecture would be that if you take any convex billiard with regular or non-regular boundary, in fact, there exist always infinitely many periodic orbits. The first case that you have to treat if you want to take a non-smooth boundary is the case of the triangle. If you are not able to treat the case of the triangle, there is no chance at all that you will go anywhere else to prove a more general result. So in fact, it's really a fundamental case in order to make a progress inside of the dynamical systems in mathematics. It's not just an amusement, it's a serious problem, in fact. I am not going in the, well, one could generalize. All my problems, I just put them in the simplest possible case, but of course, there are many, many generalizations, but I would just like to restrict to the simplest possible case where, in fact, the problem is already unsolved, in fact. Is the conjecture that? Probably yes. I have not checked, but probably yes. When there is an acute angle which becomes very small, yes. To enter into the acute angle and to go back, you need generally a large number of steps. I do not want. Let me just go. I do not want to spend all my time only on the billiard, so I shall answer the questions perhaps at the end, because otherwise I will just speak of only one problem instead of many open problems in mathematics. So let me take a fourth subject. Okay, let us try to find a nice sequence for which there is a nice open problem. I shall write for you a sequence, and then I shall tell you how this sequence is built. 1, 2, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, and you think you know the what follows, and you don't know, in fact. Now I tell you exactly how my sequence is done. This sequence is called a self-reproducing sequence. And it has been introduced by Kolakowski. And why is this sequence called self-reproducing? Because if you count the number of 1 that you find, and then the number of 2, and then the number of 1, and the number of 2, etc., and you write down on the second line, how many 1 do I have? I have 1. How many 2 do I have? Here I have 2. How many 1 do I have? Here I have 2. How many 2? I have 1. How many 1? I have 1. How many 2? I have 2. How many 1? I have 1. How many 2? I have 2. How many 1? 2. How many 2? 1. And how many 1? 2. And you understand why the sequence is called self-reproducing. And you also understand that in fact this sequence, at least if you say I start by 1, will be unique. Because in fact I know that here I want necessarily the same number as above, so I should get a 2. So if I have a 2, necessarily my sequence will continue by 2, 2, 2, because otherwise it will not be self-reproducing. So in fact there is only one such sequence. It's completely unique, and it is called the Kolakowski sequence. And let me just say a few words about Kolakowski. So in fact this sequence was introduced as a problem that he sent to the American Mathematical Monthly in 1965. He was then 21 years old, so in fact like a youth student. And he was studying painting at the College of Fine Arts in Carnegie Institute of Technology, but was also a little bit interested as a hobby in mathematics. And he had asked 2 questions about the sequence that we have here. The first question was, is it possible to give a priori a closed formula for the nth term of the sequence? This was the first question. And the second question he was asking, is the sequence periodical from some point on? And the second question, is it periodical from some point on, was solved very quickly. In fact, a mathematician called Okoluk solved it 1 year later in 1966. And the question whether one is able to give a closed formula for the nth term of this sequence seems completely hopeless with the present knowledge of mathematics. Nobody has any hope to try to get a closed formula for the nth term. But we can, in fact, people who have studied this sequence have in fact formulated a very nice conjecture. The very nice conjecture is the proportion Pn of 1s in the n first term going to 1/2 when n goes to infinity. So in other words, if you take this sequence and if you enlarge it, and if you take more and more digits, is it true that when you go very far, the proportion of 1 is 1/2, and the proportion of 2 is 1/2? So, of course, experiments have been done, numerical experiments on computer. It seems very likely to be true. I tell you also what is the present state of art for the moment. Present state of art is the following. Pn is larger than 0.499 and smaller than 0.5001 for n large enough. Which of course does not tell you at all that the limit is 1/2, but tells you, and this result was obtained by Vasek in 1994. So again, a very simple question about a very simple sequence, open problem in mathematics again. Let me take another example of a simple open problem in mathematics. And my next example will come from games. usual games, not game theory, usual games that one can play at home. There is one game which is called the Hanoi Tower game. And this game is as follows. You have 3 plots. And on the first plot, you have a pile of disks of unequal diameter, the largest being down, below, and then a second one, and a third one, and a fourth one, like this. And you ask to someone to take this pile and to transfer it to another plot with the following rule. You are allowed at each time only to move one disk to another plot, and you are never allowed to put a larger disk on top on a smaller disk. So what is the number, minimum number AN of moves that you need in order to move a pile of n disk to another plot? And this is, of course, some very simple exercise in mathematics for any mathematician, because you realize that if you want to move the last disk, which is the largest one, you have no choice. You have first to move the n-1 to some other plot, which takes you a index n-1 moves. And then you take the largest disk, you move it to the plot which is free. You add one move, and then the pile of n-1 disk, you put it on top on the larger disk, and you again have a n-1 moves, and in the total you have a n which is equal to 2 times a n-1 plus 1. And from this, of course, you will deduce immediately then the number of moves which is necessarily is of the order of 2 to the n-1. And of course, this is the reason why the game, when you are not a mathematician, looks complicated, because if you take a pile, for example, of 10 disks, the number of moves is 1023, and nobody will generally be able to do these moves correctly without knowing more or less what the strategy should be. And now I ask you, what is the open problem? And the open problem is just the following. Instead of 3 plots, take 4 plots. And ask yourself, what is the minimum number of moves, or what is the optimal strategy in order to move a Hanoi Tower to another plot, but you are now allowed to use 4 plots instead of 3. And here, the situation is very curious, because in fact, when people tried to imagine what the best strategy would be, in fact, they had an idea of what the best strategy should be. And the strategy was published. It was published in 1941. 1941. Frame and Stewart publish a probable optimal strategy. And of course, what remains to be proved is whether this strategy that has been published is indeed the optimal one. So the strategy, you have not to imagine it. You have not to find out what the best strategy is. It is already published. You take it, and you have to check that, in fact, there is no strategy which does it in less moves than the published strategy. And in fact, this is an open problem. And what is known about this problem? Known. It is optimal if n, the number of disks, is less than 30. And of course, this optimality has not been done by a human proof, but by a computer checking. And after 30, the computer was exhausted because it was too complicated for him to compute what happens in all these kind of things. So again, some open problem in mathematics which has something to do with very simple objects. Yes, if you just type Frame and Stewart 1941 on Google, you will immediately find it. You put Hanoi Tower with 4 legs, and you will immediately find it. So, next example. What time is it now? Okay. Next example is, it's a problem which is a little bit less simple than the previous one, but perhaps also much more serious, and has something to do with India. Therefore, I have included it in my list, even if it cannot really be said to be as simple as the other ones. The problem is the following. Take an integer n, and let us assume that this integer has d digits in any base, for example, base 10 if you want, or you can replace d by log of n if you wish. And d should be large. So a number with a large number of digits like 300, 400 or something like this. And you ask, what is the amount of time needed to factorize this integer with the best possible factorization program we know presently. So factorization of n can be achieved in what is called sub-exponential time. Sub-exponential meaning smaller than any constant to the power n, any constant larger than 1, of course. So in fact, the kind of bound which is known is O of d to the 1/3 times log of d, for example, is an amount of time which is needed, which is enough in order to, excuse me, not O of this. This would be to O of exponential of this. But you see, exponential of this is much smaller than exponential of a constant times d, because you have only d to the 1/3. So in fact, this is a sub-exponential time. But primality testing can be achieved due to the work of Agraval, Kayal, and Saxena, work done in 2002 in polynomial time. And of course, the present best version or variations of the initial version that was published by these 3 authors. The present best version is due to Pomerantz and Lenstra and works in a time which is O of d to the 6. I am only speaking of the version who are not probabilistic, who are deterministic, and who do not rely on any open conjecture, which are completely sure. And the question is, can square freeness be tested in polynomial time? What do I mean by square freeness? Exactly as in the case of primality testing, when you have primality testing, you ask only the computer to answer the following question: is my integer n a prime or is it not a prime? In case he answers it is not a prime, you do not ask for any explanation or factorization or anything like this. You just ask to have an answer, and the answer should be a theorem. So in fact, it's the same thing when you have your integer n. To say it is square free means all the exponents of all prime factors are 1. You just ask, is it true that all exponents are 1, or is it not true? And in fact, you ask only for an answer, yes or no. For the moment, it seems that in fact, there exists no algorithm testing square freeness, which is much better than the algorithm of factorization. So anything in between the time of factorization and the time of primality testing, anything between would already be a big progress, even if one does not achieve polynomial time. If we had something which is really smaller than d to the 1/3, would be very nice to obtain. And yes, let me just, yes, I should say that often one says that the integers, the ring of integers, looks a little bit like the ring of polynomials in one variable over a field, because both rings are principal ideal domains. You have a Euclidean division. One knows that, for example, there are analogous things, the theory of their extensions in one case or the other are the same. You find Dedekind domain in both cases and so on. But there is one big difference between the ring of integers and the ring of polynomials. In the ring of polynomials, you have a tool that you do not have over integers, and this tool is the derivative. And if I had asked the same questions for polynomials in one indeterminate, factorization of a polynomial generally over any given field is a highly complicated topic. Primality testing of a polynomial can also be achieved in polynomial time. But square freeness of a polynomial can be achieved in a polynomial time. Why can you achieve this in a polynomial time? Because you just take your polynomial and its derivative, you compute by the usual Euclid algorithm the greatest common divisor between p and p prime, and you look whether this greatest common divisor is 1 or not 1, and it tells you whether your polynomial has or has not multiple factors. So in fact, there are many first-rank mathematicians who are working in order to try to produce something that would play for integers the role of derivatives. So far, all have failed. And I think a good test to know if someone announces you, I have now a theory that copies those. The derivative you ask him, does your theory tell anything about this last question which I have written up here? If this theory does not say this, then in fact the theory does not play the same role as the derivative, because the derivative is here indeed to test the multiple factors. So this is one question which I wanted to include because I think it's a quite important question, even if it is not as simple as the other one. And now I would like to go to the next one. Next one. The India connection is the fact that the three people who have written the primarily testing algorithm are of Indian origin. And were not, when they wrote this paper, were not, at least for two of them, professional mathematicians. They were just undergraduate or graduate students. I do not know exactly what was their status at that moment. So in fact, it means sometimes you can also achieve very important results, because of course they got much fame for this result, and you can achieve something without being also in the already in the career for a long time. So next thing, I shall try to give you simple open questions concerning polygons. And this simple open question which I have chosen is a conjecture by Erdős, again. Erdős, who I learned by visiting the exhibit here in the hallway, that he visited, in fact, in 1981, the institute here. There is even a photograph remembering this event. And Sekeres. And it was stated in 1935. This conjecture says the following. Among 2 to the n minus 2 plus 1 points in the plane, in general position meaning not 3 on the same line, you can always find n of them which are the vertices of a convex polygon. And in fact, the bound that is here is sharp. If I replace 2 to the n minus 2 plus 1 by 2 to the n minus 1, in fact, the result does not hold anymore. So in fact, really, if you want the theorem to be true, you have at least to put this number of points. I just show you one picture with, let us say, I shall take 4 points. I shall take the picture with n equal 5. N equal 5. N equal 5 means I should take 8 points, one less than this, for which you will not be able to find a convex pentagon from these 8 points. So I put 1 point here, 1 point here, 1 point here, 1 point here. To help me a little bit to draw my figure, I shall just draw the 2 diagonals so that I know more or less where I pass, but these diagonals have no importance. Then you put 1 point very close to the diagonal, but not on the diagonal, and you put 1 very close to the diagonal here, and 1 very close to the diagonal here, and 1 very close to the diagonal here. And if you do this, if you take these 8 points which I have here, you have a picture for which you will not be able to find, you can check it if you wish, any 5 of the points which build a pentagon. For example, if I take, for example, this point, this point, this point, and this point, you see there is no single 5th point that I can add to them to get a convex pentagon, because either they are already inside of the quadrilateron, or if I add this point or this point, I will include this one in the quadrilateron. So in fact, this is an example that shows you that the bound is sharp. To go to 2 to the n minus 2 is a generalization of the picture which I have drawn. So, what is the present status of this conjecture? It's very nice to know the present status of this conjecture. So in fact, n equal 4 is due to Erdős and Sekeres in the paper where they state the conjecture. N equal 5 is due to Mackay, I think Mackay, and was already known at the time they wrote their paper. So they included in their paper as an announcement, but Mackay never published his proof. So in fact, later on, proofs were published for this result, but it was already a result that was known in 1935. And then n equals 6. N equals 6 and has been published by Sekeres and Peters in 2006. So there are some things which are interesting in these dates, because of course you have 2 times the name Sekeres. He states the conjecture in 1935, and there is a Sekeres who solves the case n equals 6 in 2006. Are these Sekeres the same persons? The answer is yes. So it's pretty rare to state a conjecture when you are a young man and to solve it at the end of your career. And let me just put the dates of birth and of death of Sekeres for this reason. He was born in 1911 and died in 2005. So of course this date, 2006, seems to conflict with 2005. But in fact, Peters was the student of Sekeres, and the proof had already been obtained but not published. So in fact, Peters cared for the publication after Sekeres' death of the proof. So at the time Sekeres in fact obtained this result, around 2005, he was already 94 years old. And when he stated the conjecture, he was only 24. So in fact, it's a long career on the same subject. But this subject has even more importance for the life of Sekeres. In fact, this conjecture should not have perhaps been stated as Erdős and Sekeres conjecture. The name should probably have been given to some other person, and the other person is Esther Klein, who was a young woman who was working in the same group as Erdős and Sekeres, and who stated, in fact, this conjecture in a talk that she gave in 1933, not exactly in such a precise form. In fact, more or less, she just asked, does there exist a number depending on n, such that if you take so many points, then you have n of them, which are the vertices. But she did not give a precise bound. And it is true that in Erdős and Sekeres' paper, they prove that indeed this number depending on n exists. They do not show that it is as sharp as this bound, but they give a bound which works, which is not the optimal one. And who was this Esther Klein? In fact, Erdős and Sekeres were present at the talk she gave in 1933. So in fact, they quickly started working on this problem and they published their papers. And in 1937, in fact, you will decide whether it is the happy end. In fact, Sekeres died on the 28th of August 2005. His wife, Esther Klein, died on the same day 1 hour later. So, okay, let me see whether I have still. Yes, I wanted to tell you one other funny story about this problem. In fact, you think that if Sekeres published this paper in 2006, it is probably his last paper, because of course he is no more there. But in fact, it's not his last paper. He will publish 2 more papers in 2008. In 2008. The very last paper so far published, I don't know whether the thing will continue, the very last paper published in 2008, again, was a paper that he co-signed with Lindsay Peters, his student. And if you think that Sekeres was a person working only on very elementary problems in combinatorics or so, you are completely false. First of all, his education at the beginning was chemistry. His interest was in physics. And the last paper which was published, I just read it because I know that there are a certain number of physicists also in the audience. His last paper is called Space-Time Structure and Spinor Geometry. And I give you the summary which you find in Matsinet of this paper. The structure of space-time is examined by extending the standard Lorentz connection group to its complex covering group, operating on a 16-dimensional spinor frame. A Hamiltonian variation principle is used to derive the field equations from the spinor connection. The result is a complete set of fields equations which allow the sources of the gravitational and electromagnetic fields and the intrinsic spin of a particle to appear as a manifestation of the space-time structure, a cosmological solution, and a simple particle solution, or examine further extensions to the connection group are proposed. So you see, in fact, he was working in a complete different domains, but in fact, this particular problem has nevertheless occupied him a lot for his whole life. I think I am exactly at the end of my time. I had, of course, 7 or 8 other problems to propose, but I do not want to double my time, and therefore I shall stop here for today.
Any questions? Comments? Yeah. stand this way. One second.
That self-reproducing series, did you say that it is periodic? What was it?
I said that in fact Kolakowski, who published this series in the American Mathematical Monthly, had asked as a first.
This is about the Villiers problem. With the various trajectories, do they cover or fill up the whole space area when it exists for the smooth boundary?
And there's a coordinate system, Kusil-Sekerish, yeah.